are these people?
So Dr. Afrikana gave a speech. I think the speech she gave in 2019, and I think she spoke here at a conference. But she talked about the Berlin Conference, so we're going to get a little history here. But I'm going to split. I think we're going to split it up in two parts, and then we're going to discuss it. So I think we should just get right into it, and then we'll talk about it.
Cool. Welcome to the African Leadership Series, where we bring you great inspirational speeches from African leaders.
Good evening, African Diaspora. The more I begin to understand not only our Africa, but the more I begin to understand us as Black people, why is it that we are the most disrespected people on earth, no matter where you find us on this globe? They often wondered why these Black people are so smart and so indestructible. Maybe it's because of that third eye. No, it is the melanin. That's what makes us special. That's what makes us the origin of humanity, which is our motherland. Our motherland, Africa. The continent with everything and anything the world needs. The continent that everybody is going to for their needs. But the continent that we, the children of Africa, are busy running away from. That keeps me up every night. The more I try to dig deeper in understanding as to why Africa is where Africa is today, I couldn't help but find myself repeatedly going back to the beginning to say, how did we end up where we are as Africans? How did we get here? Not only as Black people, but as Africans. The colonizers started coming to Africa, starting with the Portuguese, followed with slavery. But by 1884, after they had been haphazardly going into our continent, looting from the Africans, pretty soon they started looting from each other the loot that they had looted from the Africans. And before you know it, they were killing each other. And they were getting ready to have a war, a European war on the African soil. So Bismarck, the Chancellor of Germany at that time, called his sidekick Leopold, King Leopold of Belgium, said, listen, we got a problem. We're getting ready to kill each other and have a European war in Africa. Why don't we call all the colonizers? That was France, Germany, Italy, Spain, Portugal, Belgium, and of course the mighty Britain. Let's all meet in Berlin, Germany, and strategize on how we can organize ourselves so we can effectively see to it that Africa and her children are forever defeated and dominated. They proceeded to chop up our Africa into tiny little countries that we know of today. Economies that are designed to see to it that they will never make it on their own. And in the event those small economies do make it, they're easy to destabilize. Who, in their right mind, puts a country together like Gambia, Burundi, Togo, Djibouti, Lesotho, Swaziland, and many, if not all, African countries? Each one of them was given the same sovereignty as China, as India. If this world was to be a boxing game, you see, in boxing, they understand that heavyweights belong in the heavyweight boxing ring, middleweights in the middleweights, lightweights and wannabes in their rings. Wannabes are way out there. You don't take a wannabe boxer and throw them in the same ring with the heavyweight. But what's being done to our Africa, let's start negotiating. It's country against country. Countries, please stand up. Little Gambia stands up. And Gambia is supposed to negotiate with China. Lesotho is supposed to negotiate with India. Swaziland must jump in with the United States. Djibouti, you must go in. You see, the Europeans realized as individual European countries, they can make it. So they came together as the European Union. So they negotiate as a bloc. So yeah, Djibouti, you go in with EU. And when the African countries lose, the world stands back and says, oh, what's wrong with you, African countries? Why aren't you able to manage your people? How can that be? Where is the parity? African countries are wannabe boxers who are constantly being thrown into the heavyweight boxing ring, and we are getting our rear ends kicked day in and day out.
Thoughts?
I'm curious to see what Jaybe has. You're nodding your head quite a bit.
Yeah.
Well, it's quite interesting, especially the boxing analogy, when really the European nations decided to carve up Africa and the image that they wanted it to be. Whereas if you look at Africa as a whole, it's an extremely rich continent. In fact, it's so rich that it really could outflank the rest of the world as far as resources is concerned. I remember when Parenti actually said that there's no such thing as a poor country. Countries are not poor. He said they are rich. It's just they are overly exploited. So you can take this for the entire whole of Africa, and that they are constantly being extracted from and exploited because of imperialism that's being done by these Western European and the United States, these countries. So as far as what she was saying, I really didn't see much to disagree with at all. I saw really no lies. So
there was something that she mentioned at the very beginning that I thought was interesting given my experience living in Africa briefly and returning for visits since in East Africa.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned how Africa is a continent that everyone wants to go to, but Africans themselves are trying to get away. And in speaking with the youth, like when I was living there, and then visits since, I've had not, and this is, and take this with a grain of salt, people who are watching, but these examples are anecdotal, but I think it would be maybe worth doing a deep dive on this more, because I think there's definitely a bigger correlation to what I'm saying here. There was a lot of youth who basically asked me, what do I have to do in order to work in the States or in the UK?
Mm.
They see the West as the way for them to make it, because the infrastructure in many of these countries are not necessarily there for them.
Mm-hmm.
I know plenty of people now who I have a friend who's working in Florida, actually, on a cruise boat from Uganda. I know another person who, not right now, at least at one point, he was working in Dubai. I have another friend.
To stick with the boxing analogy, Francis Ngannou, heavyweight champion of the world right now, went from Cameroon to Morocco to France, like by way of a rubber dinghy and a paddle and like 80, friends of his, like in the dark. Had to go through the Namibian desert a few times before he got there. Like that's standard stuff from what Collin tells me. So
yeah. So for me, it's kind of like, that's why I think, especially, with people saying, I think in particular with China, because I know there's like a pro-China sentiment in terms of Africa, and I tell people it's a mixed bag. There's a lot more nuance to that, and I'm not one to speak on that necessarily. But even with China too, they're coming in, and yeah, they're doing a lot of great things. You can argue for the countries that they're working for, and there's still this idea for African people, not all, but many, who feel like I have to leave. So if China is coming in and helping, why is that sentiment still there? And I don't think I've ever seen anyone talk about it from that context. So I think it is definitely something worthwhile that we need to discuss. And I think bring in that nuance as far as China, but I know definitely from the West, like what they have done, just given the history. So it makes sense. But the idea of, relating to a boxing match, how African countries wannabe boxers are basically trying to defend themselves among heavyweights, I think is very much spot on. And I can also make that connection to, she's talking about Africans specifically. You can also see it, as far as Black people in the diaspora, like what we have to go against as far as here, in terms of issues that are specific to us that we're trying to go up against, people who are, well, as she said, well organized, elite, as I know you guys say in RVN a lot, they're organized by, they have that solidarity among each other, by class.
Yeah.
So, so it's easy for them to unite to push down the working class. And very often among the working class, we don't ever see that kind of solidarity among us usually. Well, we're divided on purpose. For that reason.
Well, one of the things that I think is also important to note is that, and you hear Nick say this all the time, the United States is the most propagandized country in the world. That propaganda also extends internationally. Right. So therefore, a lot of people, particularly a lot of young people within these African countries, are also propagandized to think that the West is better than what it actually is. Right. And so then they think, oh man, the West is popping. I got to get over there so I can actually make it. When in reality, it's only popping for the people who are rich.
Right.
And so I think that
it's popping for, people with the means to be able to go, especially from the West or from the East, like looking at the Middle East and China. And as she said, they are coming in and picking up these opportunities. And that really should be us. That really should be Black people in the diaspora in and taking in charge of those opportunities. Like,
which she gets into a little more here, if you want to finish up this little video here.
Yeah, go ahead. Volume.
Has changed. The strategy that was put in place to see to it that Africa and her children are forever defeated and dominated, remains alive and well. And yet in our minds, we tend to think Berlin Conference is a thing of the past. Well, my brothers and sisters, Berlin Conference is alive and well. And allow me to take it home for you. Have you ever wondered why intra-Africa trade is sitting at 18%? I'll tell you why. With 43 different currencies on the continent. It's difficult to trade with each other because of the currencies. It's easier for us to exchange with the US dollar, with the euro, than with each other. Why is that? Berlin Conference. It's easier for Mozambique to send Mozambican oil outside Mozambique to Europe and everywhere else, just so Zimbabwe next door can buy it from across the oceans. It's easier for a company that's manufacturing the best ceramic tiles in Africa, in Egypt. That company sends its tiles to Italy, only for the Africans to turn around and buy the same tiles, 20, 30 times the cost. Why is it that we are not trading with each other? It's because, starting in South Africa, there's a road that goes up until maybe 2-3 kilometers from the border with Botswana. And that same road picks up 2-3 kilometers into Botswana. And if only we could connect the two. But Berlin Conference said, no, you're different. You're another country. You can't look at it this way. If we were to connect all the existing power lines in Africa today, we would provide electricity to 30 million more people. And in the process, we would save $20 billion. But the reason we can't connect the power lines, thanks to Berlin Conference. We're different countries. We can cross that border. Why are our children crossing the Mediterranean in search of nothing? It's because little Gambia can only create so many jobs. And a young man in Gambia, which is surrounded by Senegal, cannot go to Senegal and look for a job. Thanks to the Berlin Conference. Question then becomes, if you look at all the issues we're dealing with today in Africa, one by one, every one of them relates back to the Berlin Conference and our inability to work together as one continent, one Africa, speaking with one voice. Thanks to Berlin Conference.
If you like informative and educative videos about Africa, make sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And might I remind the audience, who was it that was trying to create an actual African currency in order to unite Africa economically? It was the head of Libya, Muammar Gaddafi, that was actually trying to do that until he was basically murdered by the United States years ago.
Crazy how that works.
It's crazy how it works. And so he actually wanted to create a United States of Africa. And the United States and the West actually saw that as a huge, major threat. Can you imagine with the amount of resources that the continent of Africa has, and if they were able to utilize it, not only just their resources as in materials, but also as in people, and basically smash all those borders and in a sense become its own country, and then start actually contending with the West. Can you imagine what that would do to Western hegemony?
Yeah.
That would send them running to the hills. And so they know this, and this is why they have this division, because if you divide it, then guess what? This means that you keep Africa poor, so that even though they're rich, they really can't do much as far as the influence that's being exerted upon them.
It's that
Right. And
third
then along
world
with
classism that we set up after the Cold War
Right.
and before then.
Yeah.
So
Right. In the West, I think especially among Black people here, the propaganda that we look at in Africa is that they're poor. And it's like, oh, and you might be poor over here, but you're like, we got better than we do over it, or than they do over there. So we're good.
Yeah.
When it's the rich who are more in the know are like, oh, we can go to Africa and make good, who are going over and making something of themselves over there. And we're not. And I think for me, like the biggest frustration that I've had going over there for me as a Western Black person, I'm kind of considered a novelty. Like it's more expected for an African, especially in the bush, to see someone who's white. So someone like Reef, than someone like you and I, Jaybe. Like,
yeah.
Like I've literally been told that, like in person, like an African told me, yeah, like we don't make that connection that there are Black people who are living outside, because the people who are coming out from outside don't look like us, or don't look like them, rather. Like they're very obviously, not, from the continent, so to speak. So it's that idea of that division, more so not just the division within Africa, but the division outside in the diaspora as well. Like last week we talked about reparations. CARICOM has a list of demands already. I'm sure you were aware of that, but do African Americans know about that? So it's the idea of like, if we were better united, and of course, like this is on purpose. The idea is that the more divided we are, the less that we know about each other, and especially the things that we're doing that collectively we can't do much, if of anything. So I feel like the Berlin Conference isn't just necessarily affected of Africa, like primarily, by extension, it's affected us in the West as well. And as you said, Jaybe, like the struggle is international. And I think this, and I keep saying this is what makes what Obama did in terms of shutting down the NBA players when they were willing to strike in like George Floyd, all the more heinous. Because that could have been an opportunity internationally to talk about social justice on an international scale, because the NBA is watched all over the world. Yes. The idea it got that, the fact that George Floyd got all that attention anyway, could have been a marker in terms of the Black consciousness being able to have these discussions finally, and Obama stopped it.
Yeah. JB, anything to finish up with?
It's quite sad that a son of Kenya was one of the ones who shut that down. Yeah. It's pretty sad. It's depressingly ironic that someone like him would do such a thing.
Yep. I feel you.